On the last episode of the Keepsake box, Ken and I became extremely close after the promise. Our conversations became deeper, and our relationship was much more intense than any relationship between 16 and 18-year-olds should ever have been. I ate, slept, and breathed with Ken in my mind, and he seemed to do the same. As fall made its exit, I learned quite a bit about Ken. He had suffered many hardships for a boy of his age. Ken opened up about seeing his older brother get killed. He cried about his parents and their struggles with drugs. They seemed to alternate between being drug dealers and drug users, mostly the latter. We shared some of our deepest secrets. I often got close to telling Ken about Ron, but I always lost my nerve at the last minute. That was not to be the case on a cold day in December. Things really do have a way of letting themselves out of the boxes that we try to keep closed. I awakened that morning, and it felt like every other day. It was a Thursday. I got dressed and went into the kitchen to make breakfast. Mom and Cassidy had already left for the day. Ron was sitting at the table drinking his morning coffee and reading the newspaper. Something was wrong. I could tell. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "No," said Ron. "Nothing is okay." I immediately regretted asking, and I decided not to press the issue. But without being further prompted, Ron decided to elaborate. "Your mom is pregnant again." I was shocked. Cassidy was 4, and it was becoming apparent that there was something wrong with her. She was developmentally behind, and she still didn't speak well. Mom seemed to have a hard time dealing with Cassidy. I never expected her to get pregnant again. I thought back to how things were when Mom was pregnant. I also thought about how hard it was for me to care for Cassidy on a daily basis. I couldn't imagine adding another baby to the mix. I wanted to cry. I was trapped in my thoughts when I heard Ron yelling, "Londa, do you hear me?" I looked up and realized that he was standing in front of me. He looked angry. Ron started yelling about how he was already broke and how Mom had gone and gotten pregnant, as if he had played no part in the process. Ron grabbed me by my arms and started shaking me. He screamed that he was already struggling and that there would soon be another mouth to feed. I stood quietly, as I didn't know what to say. I guess my lack of response bothered Ron. He started hitting me, and he pushed me onto the floor. I cowered there, waiting for him to grow tired, but he wasn't tired. He started kicking me, and I had no other choice but to take it. Ron stopped to catch his breath. In that moment, I was presented with an opportunity, and I took it. I jumped off of the floor and made a mad dash towards the door. I ran to the bus stop where Ken was already waiting. I couldn't hide the situation any longer. My nose was bloody, and I was noticeably disheveled. "What happened to you?" Ken screamed. "Just drive," I said. Chapter 20. Somebody Has to Pay. Narrated by Shandora Warren. I had the hardest time sleeping that night. I knew something was wrong, and that feeling wouldn't go away. With or without sleep, my alarm went off at 6 o'clock. I got ready like every other day, knowing it wouldn't be like any other day. I nervously approached the kitchen, expecting a post-attack outburst from Ron. When he was angry, I usually ended up paying the price. Surprisingly, Ron sat and drank his coffee, just like he did every other morning. "What's for breakfast?" he asked. I was taken aback by his calm demeanor. I wondered when he was going to turn into the other Ron. Ron and I ate in silence. I walked to the bus stop, knowing in my heart that I would actually be catching the bus that day. I waited and waited. Of course, Ken never came. I boarded the bus with the other kids. I watched them play and throw things at each other. The whole thing felt ridiculous. I had nothing in common with them. My life was so much further ahead than that of the average 16-year-old. Things went back to normal at home. I cooked, cleaned, and took care of Cassidy. I stayed out of Ron's way, and he stayed out of mine. He took me to my hair appointments, but had very little to say to me otherwise. I assumed that Ron's attack had somehow humbled him. Life had a way of doing that. I thought about Ken a lot. and I always wondered what happened to him. It wasn't like him to just disappear. Deep in my heart, I had an idea, but I didn't want to admit that to myself. I didn't want it to be true. I missed Ken so much that I forgot every single bad thing about him. I only thought of the good and how I couldn't wait to see him again. Winter break came and went. It was January 1997. I got dressed and prepared to walk to the bus stop. It was a regular post-Ken day, or so I thought. I walked into the kitchen to find Ron partaking in his normal coffee and newspaper antics. "So I was thinking," said Ron. "Things have been a little tense lately. How'd you like to skip school and hang out today?" Ron hadn't ever offered to let me skip school, and my spirit told me that I wouldn't be happy with the outcome. I told him that I had a lot of work to do, and it wasn't a good day for me to skip school. "This isn't a request," Ron said. "Change into something decent." I had a bad feeling about the outing with Ron, but saying no was out of the question. Even though he was insistent, he was calm, cheerful even. The combination made me uncomfortable. I made breakfast and changed clothes. We got into Ron's truck and headed towards the downtown area. It was a Tuesday. I couldn't imagine what we would be doing downtown on a random Tuesday. Sharon had done my hair the Saturday prior, and it was still perfectly intact. Ron swung a left and parked in front of a brick building. I hadn't ever been there before. It wasn't until we crossed the street that I realized where we were. A courthouse. Why was Ron taking me to a courthouse? I wanted to ask, but I knew Ron well enough to know that he would refuse to tell me. Once inside, Ron instructed me to stand back while he read the docket information that was taped to the window. He led me to a courtroom to the right, and we sat in the very front. We sat for what seemed like an eternity. I fidgeted in the pew to combat the numbness and discomfort that I felt in my lower body. After a couple of hours, I finally understood why I was there. The judge called order to the court. "All parties in reference to Ken Matthews, please step forward." Ron looked over to me and flashed a devilish grin. It was in that moment that I realized how sinister he really was. Ron walked up to the podium on the left as Ken was being escorted to the right. Ken was wearing an oversized orange jumpsuit, and he was shackled at both hands and feet. He looked tired. He looked extremely tired. The tears immediately started forming in my eyes. Normally, I would fight the urge to cry, but I couldn't. I just let the tears fall. Deep down, I was hoping that Ken would see me crying and know that I was hurting over his predicament. After all, he had committed the offense for me. That fact wasn't ever in debate. Although I was sad that Ken was in jail, a part of me was grateful for the fact that he cared enough to react on my behalf. Ken promised to always love and protect me. I wanted him to know that I was grateful. Ken stepped up to the podium with his lawyer. The judge started speaking immediately. "I understand that the defendant has chosen to accept a plea bargain in exchange of a guilty plea." "Yes, Your Honor," said Ken. He sounded weak and demure. Nothing like my Ken. It was heartbreaking. The judge continued. "Do you understand that under the guidelines of your plea deal, you will not be able to appeal your guilty verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," said Ken. "So noted," said the judge. "I now sentence you to county custody for a period of 6 months, with credit for the time that you have served already. Additionally, upon completion of your sentence, you are hereby required to complete a mandatory anger management program of the county's choosing. Do you understand the terms of your incarceration and subsequent requirements?" "Yes, Your Honor," said Ken. You are now remanded to this county's custody for a period of 6 months, said the judge. And with that, the judge banged his gavel. Ron was never given the opportunity to speak. I was crushed. Ken would be gone for a total of 6 months, and I felt responsible. For a moment, I wondered if he blamed me. But just as he was being escorted to the back, Ken turned and said, "I love you." I looked at Ron. He was frantically attempting to explain something to the judge. I blew Ken a kiss and silently mouthed the words, "I love you too." By that time, whatever discord was occurring between Ron and the judge was over. Ron angrily retreated and walked past me. I sat for a moment, wondering if he had business in the back of the courtroom. He didn't. He flung the courtroom door open and exited quickly. I paused momentarily and exited as well. When I got to the truck, Ron was already inside with the engine started. I was simultaneously elated and heartbroken. Ken would be gone for a little while longer, but he didn't blame me. He still loved me. As for Ron, even though he didn't speak, I could tell that he wasn't happy. His face was contorted, and he was gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his light-skinned knuckles were white. We drove in complete silence for the entire ride home. And I mean total silence. No talking, no radio, no nothing. We both exited the vehicle without either uttering a word to the other. I went to my bedroom and Ron went to his. I felt accomplished, as if I had beat Ron at the game that he had so maliciously forced me to play. It felt good, and I was still riding the wave of having seen Ken. So what could go wrong? Everything. I went into my bedroom and started changing clothes. Ron, who hadn't said much to me since the attack, was suddenly very chatty. He entered my bedroom as I was getting dressed. He didn't knock, of course. I had already put on my sweatpants, and I hurriedly threw on a t-shirt. "We need to talk," said Ron. I took my seat on the bed, as I knew Ron would do as well. It was reminiscent of times past, and I didn't have any expectation that there would be a favorable outcome. "Have you ever been told not to let your right hand know what your left hand is doing?" asked Ron. I had indeed heard that phrase. Grandma used that one all the time. However, I didn't understand its relevance to the situation. Ron, of course, was more than happy to enlighten me. "Londa, I've known all along who attacked me. That was a little secret that I decided to keep to myself. While that little punk was beating me senseless, he made sure to issue a warning. He told me that he'd come back to kill me if I ever put my hands on you again." The shock I displayed on my face was genuine. "I had no idea," I said. Ron started laughing. It was the most sinister of laughs, and I knew I was in trouble. He continued, "I thought you were smarter than that, Londa. Not only did you defy me by having a boyfriend, but you found one that was dumb enough to leave the license plates on when he attacked me. You really picked a winner, Londa." I sat quietly. The secret of Ken was out, and I wasn't going to dig myself in a deeper hole by denying it. Ron told me that he couldn't place the blame squarely on Ken because he knew that I was aware of the situation. I tried to offer a rebuttal, but he stopped me. "Actions have consequences," said Ron. "Your boyfriend fractured my ribs and messed up my face, and all he got was 6 months. I'm sure you can understand why I'm so upset." I saw Ron's anger starting to build, and I was powerless to stop it. "There's nothing I can do to him, at least not for a few months," said Ron. "He told me that somebody had to pay, and he decided that he would punish both me and Ken." Before I could object, Ron stood and slapped me in the face. "If he thought he was mad before, he's really going to have a reason now," said Ron. He pushed me back into the bed and attempted to pull my sweatpants off. I tried to fight him, but he was much stronger than I was. Ron seemed to enjoy the fight. He had the strangest expression on his face, almost like a smirk. But that quickly changed when I scratched his face in an attempt to get him off of me. Ron became extremely irate. Before I could think, he punched me in the mouth. The taste of warm blood filled my mouth, so much so that I started to choke on it. That was the first time that Ron had struck me in the face with a closed fist. I instinctively grabbed my mouth, freeing my hands from my sweatpants. Ron pounced on the opportunity and wrestled my pants off. That was what I considered to be at the time, the first time that I was raped. It was violent. I've tried to push that event out of my mind ever since it happened, but I've relived it in instances where I've had no valid reason to do so. If not for the need to tell this story, I would not have ever spoken of it again. When Ron was finished, he pulled his pants up and smiled. After a few minutes of watching me cry, Ron spat in my face. "Actions have consequences," he said. And with that, he left my bedroom. I was not only physically hurt, but I was humiliated. I locked my bedroom door and went into my bathroom. I certainly looked like what I had been through. My lip was bloody and swollen, and I was visibly disheveled. I sat on the toilet. A trail of blood followed me, making me aware that I was severely damaged down below. I showered and got into bed. I didn't want to be anywhere in Ron's line of sight. I hated myself for the times that I wanted his attention. That was one of the lowest points in my life. When Mom arrived home from work, she knocked on my door. I opened it and saw that Ron was standing behind her. Mom hugged me and started speaking. "Londa, you know I don't condone violence, but if somebody hits you, you are well within your rights to hit them back. Don't worry about the suspension. You just stay home tomorrow and get some rest." Ron looked at me and smiled. He bypassed Mom and gave me a hug. He whispered into my ear, "Actions have consequences." I knew better than to dispute the lie that Ron told Mom. That certainly wasn't on my list of consequences to face that day. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Don't worry about dinner. We'll order pizza," said Mom. The next day, Ron beat me severely when Mom went to work. Why? The rape had cued him into the fact that I was no longer a virgin, and somebody had to pay for that. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to follow Shinny Tells a Story on Facebook and Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. If you're interested in purchasing books by Shandora Warren, they're all available on Amazon. I sincerely appreciate each and every one of you. Thanks for helping me to create the world that I want to see. Oh yeah, you're welcome.